You know I had to call in Pops for this one. Welcome back to the build series of the 97 Revival. The next step is getting Steely equipped with the winch-mounted Bullbar. To start, I removed the OEM tow hooks from the frame, M12 bolts, so I hit them with a quick 17mm socket and those were out. We then test fit the bumper onto the frame rails to check alignment and access to the winch. It slid right on, everything lined up, but we did run into one issue. The remote socket on the Xeon XC control pack was sitting too close to the grill, making it impossible to plug in that remote. Now, I could have rotated the control pack, but that would interfere with the front plate, so that wasn't an option. Luckily, Warren had already thought this through. By removing the two screws on the socket, there's an integrated 9-inch remote socket lead that lets you extend it. Super clean solution, so shout out to the engineers at Warren. So we pulled that out and kept moving. With that sorted out, we set the bumper back onto the frame and got ready to secure it. The ARB Bullbar comes with all the mounting hardware, including the signal lights, which I will install in another video, license plate and fair lead mounting hardware, which we won't need, bumper mounting hardware, which I already separated, and they include the M10 by 30mm bolts with spring and flat washers for the side of the frame rails, the M12 by 30mm bolts with spring and flat washers for the top of the frame rails, and finally the M12 by 50mm bolts with spring and flat washers and spacers for the OEM tow hooks on the bottom of the frame rail. I started by hand threading the M12 by 30mm top bolts onto the frame, then moved on to the side. Because of the weight of the bumper, we had a slight misalignment, so we threw a jack underneath with a block to lift it just enough to line everything up. Once the M10 by 30mm side bolts were in using a 14mm socket, we moved on to the bottom. Using a jack to lift it in place once again, we reinstalled the tow hooks with the spacers and got those M12 by 50mm bolts started by hand, then slightly tightened them using a 17mm socket. Then we repeated the same process on the passenger side, starting with the bottom first, then the side, and finally the top. Once everything was sitting right, I went back through and fully tightened all the hardware. From there, we routed the winch power cables and temporarily connected them to the battery, since we will be upgrading the battery later on. With everything hooked up, we turned on the rig, plugged in the remote, and my dad carefully winched in as I fed the rope onto the drum, paying attention to how it stacks and adjusting as needed. Now, I'll be actually stretching the winch rope under load later on, but this should get us what we need for the time being. Once we got towards the end of the rope, it was time to install the F55 Ultra hook. I pulled the snap ring, removed the pin, seated the thimble into the hook, reinstalled the pin, and locked the snap ring back in. We then bumped the winch one last time until the Ultra hook seated against the fair lead. And just like that, the bull bar, the winch, fair lead, and Ultra hook setup are fully installed on Steely. This thing is really starting to come together. Thanks for tuning in. Hit that follow button and I'll see you in the next step.